All right, hi guys. Today we're going to talk more about the climate science stuff and the fraud of climate science and what they're trying to do with it, and also how they are training their AI models to basically regurgitate the mainstream narrative, which sort of bakes in the result that they want, and going to demonstrate how these models, these AI models, I'm going to use Grok just because I'm paid for that one. Um, and it helps me with code actually. It's okay for code. I mean, it makes a lot of bugs sometimes. But anyway, not to get distracted here. Just how they're trained on data, and because they're not actually thinking rational entities, all they do is repeat garbage, right? Repeat garbage. If there's garbage out there that everybody believes in, they're trained on it, well, they're going to repeat the garbage, and they obviously aren't going to understand a basic logical flaw in reasoning, right? So let's get into what I've done here. I'm dressing my hoodie because I'm just done a 3-day water fast, and so my body metabolism is really low and I'm freezing cold. So I'm just trying to stay warm. I think my voice sounds a bit funny too for some reason, just whatever, some sort of consequence. But don't worry, I ate this morning, and I'm gonna have a nice big grass-fed organic steak later, right after this actually. So don't worry, I'm gonna be refeeding here. Okay, so I showed this diagram and a bunch of other ones, which I'll show you, to Grok. And Grok said, while your spherical model, I'm not going to show this part, I should show this output, I'm not going to bother. The point was that Grok sided with the peer review because obviously I'm contradicting the greenhouse effect, and Grok says you're not allowed to do that. So remember, I covered this in my book, Planet Wars. I submitted a spherical model for doing pedagogical teaching of how the Earth works and how the Earth-Sun interaction works. I thought, why not do a spherical model instead of flat Earth model? So this is the existing pedagogical universal model over here on the left where my cursor is, model that they use for teaching how the sun interacts with the earth. So they have a flat earth, and that's for the whole earth. That's not for a small section of the earth. That is, the whole entire earth is flat, but there's mathematical consequences when you do that, because you're introducing a topology, right? You are introducing a flat earth topology when you do that. Obviously, it's a flat line. So the mathematical consequence of that topology for the Earth is that the sunshine is made to be minus 18 degrees Celsius. That's just how it works out in the math. Sunshine is made minus 18 degrees Celsius. Wow, that's cold. How can the sun create the climate? Well, it doesn't create the climate because this is the model we're using. Instead, there's an amplification mechanism which creates the climate, and we call this the greenhouse effect, right? And so that's where the greenhouse effect comes from. It's an amplification mechanism which has to be introduced because we are starting with a flat Earth topology, and the mathematical consequence of that is a minus 18 degrees Celsius sun heating, solar heating Earth on the Earth, which cannot explain the climate. Yeah. Okay, so I wrote up this spherical model and showed how the math works for that, and the math for that works out that the sun is actually really quite hot in space at the top of the atmosphere, and even on the surface of the Earth. As an average on the daylit hemisphere, it's 30 degrees Celsius. At maximum, it's almost 90 degrees Celsius. And actually on the ocean, where there's almost no albedo, you get almost the full effect of 100 degrees, over 100 degrees Celsius, where the heating occurring in the ocean. Of course, the ocean has very high thermal capacity, so the water doesn't get that hot, but it does absorb all that energy. If you had a black surface there, it would get that hot actually, right? So probably a spherical model is better for understanding how the sun heats the earth and interacts with the earth, right? And then also I introduce or incorporate the adiabatic gradient just because that's such a fundamental property of any gas in a gravitational field. Any gas in a gravitational field manifests, and it doesn't depend on convection, it manifests at the molecular level, doesn't require convection, just because some people say that. But the consequence is that the gas at the bottom of an atmosphere has to be the hottest gas. The average temperature gas will be in the middle, and the coolest gas will be at the top of the atmospheric gas, right? So because you have this natural distribution, that automatically means that the hottest, warmest gas relative to the average is going to be at the bottom of the atmosphere. I mean, the average cannot be found at the extremity by definition, right? The average has to be found in the average. Where's the average? Well, the average is in the middle by definition, right? And the adiabatic gradient requires that the hottest gas is going to be found at the bottom of the distribution. So therefore, that can't be where the average is found, right? By definition, the average has to be found in the middle. And so if you simply apply the equation, you get the surface temperature without any greenhouse effect, right? Very nice. So I showed these diagrams. This one, I mean, we can just review what the peer review people said. So, Bulletin of the American Meteorological Society, they said this manuscript referring to this model where I presented it. Again, it's in Planet Wars, my book, if you want to read that in detail. So I had said incoming sunshine of high intensity flux is capable of directly producing the climatological effects as a response to heat flow from the sun. That's a reasonable thing. Don't you think that's a reasonable thing to say in climate science? Don't you think that's a reasonable thing to say in climate science? The sun creates the climate and heats the ground. Like, freaking wacko. So this is their response. This is all nonsense. None of it has been demonstrated, and the principles upon which it is based are wrong. The proposed spherical Earth is incomplete and quite wrong in so many ways. Guys, like, how is that possible? Of course, in my book, Planet Wars, I explain why this is possible, how it became to be possible, and where it's going. All right, so just, I mean, crazy, right? So again, I submitted to 13 different journals, or 14 or something like that. But 5 actually wrote back to say why they didn't agree with it. So this is Energy Environment. Do not find your manuscript suitable. There should be some solid theoretical evidence provided to support your proposed idea of a spherical Earth, because everyone's doing this flat Earth thing, right? That's the basis. That's a peer-reviewed and universally accepted basis that they teach in university, right? So they're like, you need to provide some evidence that flat Earth is that your spherical Earth is a better method, which would lead to scientifically significant results. Well, the spherical model shows that the sun can create the climate. The flat Earth model shows that the sun can't create the climate. Isn't that a scientific difference? Isn't that a scientifically significant result? I mean, how is this possible, right? This is Planetary Science Journal. Assessment of your manuscripts presents no compelling evidence or analysis for a new approach or model. More extensive underpinnings are required for new scientific claims of the spherical Earth. So this is just a claim, right? I'm just claiming that the Earth is a sphere, and that the way that the math works out for that is topologically different than flat. I mean, that's just a claim. There's no difference. And I think that the flat Earth one is better. I mean, your claim of doing it on a sphere, I mean, why would you do that? I mean, if you're going to choose one or the other, go with flat, right? I mean, why not choose one or the other? Oh, my goodness. American Journal of Physics. Not appropriate for publication. Deals with subjects that would be adequate for university-level teaching. Well, that's what this is. This is university-level teaching. That's what it is. Scientific, not with scientific quarrels or alternate interpretations. One might conceive, like the spherical Earth you mentioned. Oh, yeah. It's just something I conceived and came up with, yeah. Oh yeah, this was golden. Your approach of a spherical Earth should first be vetted by experts who can validate or invalidate. Well, I mean, you're a scientific journal. Are you not qualified to vet if the Earth is a sphere versus a flat plane and vet the math? I mean, is that not your role in peer review? I mean, what a ridiculous rejection of the responsibility that they're supposed to have, right? So stupid. Last one, Journal of Atmospheric and Solar Terrestrial Physics. Your arguments and considerations spherical Earth are ad hoc. That means just made up. Provided without adequate referencing. Who should I reference? Who was it? Eratosthenes? Should I reference him for proving that the Earth was a sphere? Who should I reference exactly? No mathematical rigor. Yeah, there's this. Oh, but this flat Earth model, that has mathematical rigor, right? Oh, yeah. But my spherical model with the math there? That's just not mathematically rigorous enough. Oh, but this flat Earth model, that has mathematical rigor, a couple of equations. Mine with even more equations, not mathematically rigorous. The reader is simply assumed to accept the author's statements that the spherical Earth model is an improvement over flat Earth. Guys, they literally said this in peer review. They literally said these things in peer review, okay? Statements are made without evidence or justification. Example, spherical Earth is empirically realistic. Holy crap. Like sometimes I forget just what I discovered and how bad it was. Such statements are given as fact without evidence. I can show you the original emails. I copied them directly in my Planet Wars book. They literally said these things, right? So just to confirm, yeah, this is the foundation of climate science. I sourced these from a bunch of different university teaching websites, teaching courses. And these are just some examples. Harvard University, Chicago, University of Columbia, University of Penn State, University of Washington. Here's American Meteorological Society with a peer-reviewed. And this is, there's a little curve here, but they're still using the numbers which come out of the flat Earth models. Those numbers are quite unique because they have to work out that way with a flat Earth topology. When you use a spherical Earth topology, the numbers work out completely differently. And so you can identify that. This is still, even though they have a little curve here, this is still using flat Earth topology. Right, and then here's my thermodynamic energy budget. Anyway, I presented these to Grok, these 5 exhibits here, and Grok was like, well, you're contradicting peer review, and the peer reviewers are correct because you're saying that there's no greenhouse effect, and so that's wrong. And so I didn't save that one. It was just annoying, so I deleted that interaction with Grok. But I thought, how can I reorient this this approach with Grok to try to get it? And I know it's just a statistical model of language with tokens and all this sort of stuff. It's not really thinking. It's not aware. It's not anything. It's just a computer program. I get that, but it's still fun to play with because you see how it's being trained to maintain narrative. And well, it's important because these people like these people, I wrote this long ago in a book or somewhere. I just said that these people who are obsessed with these AIs are going to treat them like gods, and they're already doing it. And a few months ago, Musk and his AI team had a presentation where they introduced Grok 3, and one of the techs literally says, I should go find that, and I should clip that out. It'd be so good to show you. Says it's almost spiritual. He says, quote unquote, it's almost spiritual when they're watching Grok produce some output. It's almost spiritual. So these people literally are thinking that AI is a spiritual thing. It's just a very short step to worshiping it. They're going to worship it. But these things, they don't think they're not alive, they're not life forms. But of course, scientific materialists don't know what life is, and they don't know what a life form is, and they think that life is simply smashing matter together in a special way, and that well, anyway, these programs, these AI programs are neat. They can repeat what they're trained on. Yeah, they're novel. I've been having Grok help me with code, and yeah, it's pretty impressive. I mean, it doesn't not make mistakes. It does make mistakes. You still got to be able to read code and understand the process and stuff. But it does a lot, and that's handy. And actually, I should maybe comment. I don't want so many distractions to go on here. I've been writing about the idea of a soft singularity just online. So a soft singularity, it's not going to be like the singularity where Ray Kurzweil thinks, where these AIs become conscious, real life forms. That's just not going to be ever possible, especially with LLMs. I mean, maybe if you had a completely different system, but not with the large language models that are just based on statistics and tokens and all this. There's no reason why that would become conscious. Of course, to a materialist, they have no idea what conscious is. They think that might become conscious and be a real life form. Anyway, the soft singularity is going to be like think of Star Wars, where you have C-3PO, right? He's very handy, a very handy tool, or R2-D2, very handy tools. So there will be a sort of singularity, but it's going to be a soft singularity where we as humans come to terms with how to use these things, creatively, for creative output, right? For producing new software, possibly new art, possibly. Although it's not really, I mean, I think we still want art and music to be produced by humans. It doesn't count if it's produced by AI. But for producing code and for doing tasks for us, that's just menial, the equivalent of menial labor. That's good. And again, you have to ask, does, like the Luddites used to say, does removing the responsibility of work from humans lead to a good outcome? And there's episodes in Star Trek, obviously, and it's just, I know I'm referencing fiction, but it just makes a good case. What if we become completely dependent on AI and forget how to do anything ourselves? That's not going to be a good outcome. So we'll see what happens. So at best, we're going to get a soft singularity where these tools assist us to produce new novel things and make work easier, just like the engine did pulling a plow, the tractor, right? We're not going to get the hard singularity where these things become actually conscious. Anyway, so I went back to Grok, and instead of just showing it that, which gives it the like if it gets the opportunity to agree with the mainstream, to agree with what it's been trained on, then it's going to do that, right? Like it hates being contradicted. All of these AIs, these LLMs hate being contradicted. I mean, you can point stuff out to them and they just hate it. So anyway, I said, let's take a different approach to force this, not force it to, just to get it to answer in proper context without referencing its training data, which is trained to approve of flat earth theory, right? So I just started with the question, is flat earth valid? So of course it says no, and I'll have this linked with a video so you can read this thread. It's not too long. So it just says, yeah, no, flat earth isn't valid, and there's lots of evidence to show that it isn't. I said, okay, great. So then I asked the question again, but if someone were to make a mathematical physics model of the Earth, wouldn't that give it legitimacy? Because, that's what they did here. They made a flat Earth, but they put a lot of math with it. Well, now it's legitimate, right? Well, Grok says, no, it's still not legitimate. Just because you put some math to it, it's still not. Okay, good. Grok is working. It's, quote unquote reasoning. They think that. Like, that's why Musk made a big deal about naming it Grok, because Grok means, and he almost said it with like a breathless voice, to fully understand. He's just like, he thinks that this thing, this LLM, fully understands and is truly reasoning, right? They're not truly reasoning. They're not aware of anything at all. It's just a software program that sticks words together in a statistically likely fashion, based on what it's been trained on, seeing what is most statistically likely to say in this context of words, what's a statistically likely output. That's all that it does. That's not reasoning. If they think that's what reasoning is for humans, holy crap. I mean, yeah, that's what a materialist probably would think is reasoning for humans, but it's not. These are machine people. So anyway, so Grok disagreed with that. So then I said, okay, but what if it's taught to people at university as the physics of how the Earth worked? Wouldn't that then make it legitimate? And Grok says, no, just because people were taught that would not make flat Earth legitimate, the flat Earth model legitimate. Okay, great. I said, but what if the flat Earth model showed a different physics which doesn't occur and cannot be observed? Wouldn't that make it legitimate? Because, of course, you can't observe flat Earth, and you can't observe that the sun is only minus 18 degrees Celsius worth of heating on the ground. These things, you don't observe that from space, right? And he said, no. Grok said, no, still not valid. And then I said, okay, but what if we taught a flat Earth model in university and it showed that the sun cannot create the climate? Wouldn't that then make it legitimate? Grok says, no, that wouldn't be legitimate. That would not make it legitimate. And it's like, and this is coming off of me previously showing him these exhibits and him saying, no, your spherical model needs proof and needs testing. This current approach is legitimate, right? So this is why I sort of reoriented the way to ask it about it, right? So he says, nope, still not valid. So then I said, but what if the flat Earth math model showed that the sun cannot heat anything to above minus 18 degrees on the surface of the Earth, and we taught this as basic planetary physics in university? Wouldn't this flat Earth math model then be legitimate? And Grok says, even if it was taught in universities, it would not be legitimate. And then here he brings up a spherical model. I haven't even presented a spherical model. He's just saying spherical model is better. A flat Earth model making such a claim would fail to explain these observations and lack empirical support, rendering it scientifically invalid despite being taught. Okay, so far he's reasoning, quote unquote, what passes for reasoning well. But what if we truly believed in this flat Earth model, where the sun cannot heat anything above minus 18 degrees Celsius? If everyone believed it, wouldn't that make it correct and right? He says, no, widespread belief in it still wouldn't make it correct or scientifically valid. Truth depends on empirical evidence, alignment with observations, not consensus or beliefs. I mean, if these things could actually be made to reason, I don't think they just know how to do that. How would you actually program in reasoning? Reason seems to be a property of the ensouled mind. It's just not something that NPCs or these LLM AIs are capable of. You need a soul. Apparently you need a real soul to reason. It would be neat if they could actually make a truly reasoning model, but they don't. But so far its reasoning is doing well. What passes for its reasoning is doing okay. So it's saying that they contradict the flat Earth model and support spherical Earth. If universally believed, climate patterns would still render it invalid, as science prioritizes evidence over popular opinion. Well, this is popular opinion, the flat Earth model. Okay, nice. Then I said, what would happen if we just kept on believing in the flat Earth model, where the sun cannot heat anything above minus 18°C? What would we do to explain the higher temperatures? What sort of hypotheses might we come up with to explain higher surface temperatures than this? Speculate some options. And I instructed it earlier to only respond with 1 or 2 paragraphs, so I'm saying it can respond more now. So blah, blah, blah. It would have to come up with some alternate explanations. So first one, localized heat sources beneath the Earth's surface. Yeah, reasonable postulate. Geospheric heating. Of course, we know that doesn't occur. Look what it does here. Atmospheric amplification effect. That's the greenhouse effect, guys. Another hypothesis might suggest, so this is asking Grok, what if we kept on believing in the flat Earth model, where the sun can't create the climate? What would we have to come up with in order to explain the climate and higher temperatures? An atmospheric amplification effect. Guys, that's the greenhouse effect. That's what these little arrows for their stupid back radiation heating, or whatever they want to call it, that has a bunch of different definitions. You know, it's so funny, right? Because at first, this was all about back radiation. They talked about how back radiation could heat. And it was me. It was literally me and the group of people I worked with, the quote-unquote slayers. It was us who forced them to stop saying that. And then they switched to, oh no, it's not that, it's switched cooling. But think about that. How can a mechanism which was supposedly very well understood and very well described with these diagrams, all of a sudden not be the mechanism anymore? All of a sudden it wasn't back radiation heating anymore. Now it was slowed cooling, right? Like, think of how invalid that is, philosophically and scientifically, to have alternate explanations. Of course, the slowed cooling doesn't work either, because heat isn't a conserved quantity. There doesn't have to be a fixed rate of heat flow between the atmosphere and surface. It can go to zero and you can still conserve energy, because the energy is being emitted to the outside. That's where the conservation occurs, is the outside, not between the Earth and atmosphere, right? And in any case, you still have the adiabatic gradient explaining why the bottom of the atmosphere is warmer, is the warmest part, right? Anyway, I've covered that previously. So atmospheric amplification effect. Another hypothesis might suggest that the Earth's atmosphere has a unique property that amplifies and generates heat independently of the sun. Guys, this is amazing. It's describing the greenhouse effect as a fictional, made-up effect to justify or to explain flat Earth theory, right? This can involve positing unknown or atmospheric layer that traps or produces energy, raising surface temperatures. For instance, they might claim a fictional gas or particles in the atmosphere. converts it to extreme heat, converts solar heating to extreme heat. Well, yeah, if you work out the numbers, they actually, for their flat Earth math, it's actually that the atmosphere and greenhouse gases provide twice the amount of heat than the sun does. That's actually how their math works out. That's actually shown right here. Here, I mean, here it's 168 only ends up being absorbed by the surface from the sun, and back radiation is doing 390. So that's almost a factor of 2, or around a factor of 2, right? So the atmosphere is heating. Yeah, that's an intense heat from the atmosphere. Twice as much heat from the atmosphere than from the sun. I mean, that's so funny that Grok accidentally came up with this. This would require ignoring extensive atmospheric data from spectroscopy and weather models which show no such mechanism and would fail to explain why temperature patterns align with solar exposure rather than atmospheric anomalies. So funny, so good. So it basically postulates that, yeah, that you would have to come up with the greenhouse effect in order to explain or justify flat Earth theory with no solar heating, or minus 18 degrees solar heating. And then it just throws out a couple of other options, which are interesting but not relevant, because that was the really good one. That really made me laugh. So I said, what if we went with option 2, atmospheric amplification effect? What diagram, or would this diagram satisfy or be consistent with that approach? So I just made it's not going to show it. Oh, here it is. So I just made a quick and dirty little diagram of the greenhouse effect, sun minus 18 degrees Celsius, atmospheric amplification mechanism to get greater than minus 18 degrees Celsius. Here's the Earth's surface, entire Earth is flat, and there's the atmosphere. So of course that aligns with these diagrams, right? I just made a nice little simpler one, right? So then Grok responds. Yes, it aligns conceptually with the atmospheric amplification effect hypothesis. This hypothesis posits that atmosphere is a unique property that amplifies or generates heat, allowing surface temperatures to exceed the sun's supposed limit. This diagram illustrates this by suggesting the atmosphere boosts the temperature, consistent with the idea of an atmospheric mechanism creating additional heat. Like, it doesn't realize that it's talking about the greenhouse effect. Like, if I was to tell it, it would start freaking out and be like, oh, no, wait. And it tries to do that a little bit down below. However, this model is inconsistent with observable evidence, temperature data, solar radiation measurements, blah, blah, blah. So, not real. Just because you can make that diagram, it's not real. And I said, okay, but what if that diagram was taught in university? Wouldn't that make it legitimate and be the truth of what the atmosphere, or what the Earth is and how it works? Grok says teaching the diagram at university while depicting a flat Earth with an atmospheric amplification mechanism wouldn't make it legitimate or true. Just because you taught it, just because it was widely accepted, wouldn't make it legitimate or true. Okay, thanks, Grok. Good. So then I said, so you're saying that a flat Earth with minus 18C solar heating and an amplification effect to make higher temperatures than that isn't valid? And he says, yes, saying I agree, a flat Earth with minus 18C heating and an amplification effect to explain higher temperatures isn't valid. That's so good. So funny. The proposed amplification effect lacks observable support and fails to explain temperature patterns. Okay, good. Then I said, but what if I use this diagram, which has even more math in it, showing how the flat Earth physics would work out? Isn't this valid now? So this one is from, which one is this from? That's the University of Washington one? Yeah, right there. So this one is actually taught in classrooms, right? And look at how fancy and complicated it looks, right? That sure looks like real science. And Grok says, still isn't valid. While it uses mathematical concepts like energy balance and black-body radiation, it misapplies them to a flat Earth model, which contradicts observable evidence. Excellent. The diagram's math may be internally consistent, but it fails to match empirical reality, making the flat Earth model scientifically invalid. Exactly. So then I said, okay, what about this model? Would this be better or worse? And of course, this is my model, the spherical Earth model. The people who believe in the flat Earth model say that this model is worse and that it has no evidence of any kind to support it, as we went through earlier in the exhibits. So Grok says, presents a spherical Earth model with solar inputs and outputs, calculating temperatures, blah, 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 while accounting for albedo. It's better than the flat Earth model because it aligns with empirical evidence. Solar radiation measurements, temperature records, and atmospheric physics, example, the lapse rate. These are consistent with a spherical Earth as confirmed by satellite data and climate models. Okay, great. Flat Earth proponents claim this model lacks evidence, but that's incorrect. So that makes the peer reviewers flat Earth proponents, doesn't it? The spherical model is supported by extensive observations. And then here, look at how he starts inserting the greenhouse effect, right? I had not mentioned anything about the greenhouse effect. Of course, it's not reasoning, so it doesn't understand that the greenhouse effect is the amplification mechanism, right? So, but it still throws that in there. So now we start seeing its training bias start coming in, right? So it's trained to repeat what it's been trained on, right? So the greenhouse effect is a phrase you get out there, so of course it's just inserting it, right? But of course it has no comprehension that the greenhouse effect is the amplification mechanism, which it just said would be flawed and wrong and arbitrary and ad hoc, right? In order to make flat Earth theory work, right? But then does reference latent heat and tropospheric dynamics. So the flat Earth model fails to explain these phenomena, making the spherical model far more robust and evidence-based. Well, thank you, Grok. And then I clarified to it, the greenhouse effect is not about latent heat and the tropospheric dynamics of the adiabatic effect. The greenhouse effect is, in fact, the amplification mechanism. So here I'm now bringing it out. I'm now like, okay, Grok, this is what I've been doing to you. The greenhouse effect is in fact the amplification mechanism from the flat Earth math model. If the climate greenhouse effect is in fact the flat Earth amplification mechanism, whereas the spherical model uses the adiabatic effect, which again is not the greenhouse effect, which is a natural result of a gas in a gravitational field, which makes the gas at the bottom of the atmosphere be the hottest gas, then what does this imply about the greenhouse effect amplification mechanism, which comes from the flat Earth model? So Grok replies, if we accept the premise that the greenhouse effect is the flat Earth amplification mechanism, where the atmosphere amplifies the sun's limited minus 18C heating to higher surface temperatures, it implies this mechanism is an attempt to explain observed temperatures without relying on the spherical Earth's physics. Okay, good so far. However, this reinterpretation is flawed. So here now it starts repeating its training data. The reinterpretation is flawed. The greenhouse effect, as understood in mainstream science, involves gases like CO2 trapping infrared radiation, not a vague amplification. Well, Grok, that's just what you were talking about. And is supported by extensive data. I mean, it's not. Infrared spectroscopy is not equivalent to the greenhouse effect. Showing that a gas absorbs and scatters heat is not what the greenhouse effect is about. And global temperature trends. Well, the global temperature trends that we all know that the data is being manipulated. And also the global temperature trends do not actually show warming. You know, if you look at the raw data, of course, Tony Heller and lots of other people have been showing how these trends are being manipulated. And anyway, there is no warming happening. The models are all running hot. The flat Earth's model, but then it goes back to reality. The flat Earth model's amplification lacks empirical evidence and fails to predict phenomena like seasonal temperature variations, blah, blah, blah. In contrast, see, it's kind of glitching here because it's contradicting itself. Obviously, it has no idea though, right? In contrast, the spherical model's adiabatic effect, where gas in a gravitational field is hotter at the bottom due to compression and the lapse rate, is a natural, measurable process, distinct from the greenhouse effect. If the flat Earth model mislabels the greenhouse effect as its amplification mechanism, it implies a fundamental misunderstanding of atmospheric physics, substituting a speculative, untestable idea for well-established science, undermining its validity further. Yes, that's right. If you apply that to this greenhouse effect amplification mechanism. So that's where I stopped. It was pretty interesting. I'll post this link just so you can read it for yourself if you want. But anyway, it takes some wrangling. These LLM models, they're not reasoning. They're not self-aware. They're not thinking, right? They're just repeating statistical likely. They just have a great big model. It's probably many, many terabytes in size, or petabytes even. It's huge. It's trained on the entire internet, and all that they do is statistically gather, word tokens or whatever, and put them together. And of course, it's just going to repeat. So, when you're focusing on flat Earth theory, of course, it's going to reject flat Earth theory, right? Because that's mostly what you get although there's flat earthers out there, the majority of people are, debunking and denying flat Earth theory, right? And so it's repeating that, and that's fine, that's good. But then when you start tying it to climate science and saying, oh, well, look, here's flat Earth theory and climate science, it's the basis of climate science and climate alarmism, then it starts having to statistically respond with what is the majority response for that. And the majority response for that, the most statistically likely response for that, is to then justify flat Earth theory and justify that it works and that the physics and artificial ad hoc amplification mechanisms that you invent and come up with create to justify flat Earth theory or make it work. Well, then it's going to start trying to defend that, right? So in my Planet Wars book, just to end here, I point out that there seems to be something bigger going on here. Like if you go back to those exhibits, remember how much I was laughing at the ridiculousness of the responses from peer review. How could peer review journals say that they're not qualified to judge between flat Earth theory and spherical Earth theory models, right? How are they saying that I'm ridiculous and wrong, and that I'm wrong in so many ways to present a simple spherical model of the Earth with sunshine shining on the Earth with a day side and a night side? I mean, they literally said, you saw the quotes earlier, that this is quite wrong in so many ways. It's so preposterous, right? It's so preposterous, I've had some of you may be aware of crises I'm experiencing or have experienced in the past year in my life. One thing that I kind of thought about was how I've almost lived through a Star Trek episode personally of discovering a paradox and thinking of, like a paradox in the space-time continuum sort of thing, because it's so paradoxical, it's so impossible to find other scientists. And I lost my job over this. I lost my job over saying that the Earth is a sphere, right, in astrophysics. So how can it be that I'm finding these results from peer review that are just so impossible? It's impossible. I wrote in one of my books that if you find something impossible, it's because it's purposeful. Impossible things don't exist on their own, right? They exist because they're purposefully created, right? So what exactly is behind this impossibility? So of course in Planet Wars I point out, well, you have to look at their goals. Where are they going to? And so where they're going to, what the thrust is, what they're going to, where they're going towards in terms of justification, in terms of funding, in terms of what they want to do about it, is block out the sun using multiple means, using stratospheric aerosol spraying to make clouds to block out the sun, first of all. And then they also want to create giant space umbrellas, which will literally just block out the sun, like just with a great big black space umbrella, like the moon in front of the sun, just block it right out, because wow, the Earth is going to get so hot, right, from this artificial non-existent amplification mechanism, which is so obviously false and stupid based on flat Earth theory, and you can't talk to them about it, and they just really want to go ahead. So they have a determined goal. They have a determined endpoint, a determined goal and direction where they want to get to, and they could care less about having a discussion between spherical Earth versus flat Earth. They're going with flat Earth. It's so absurd and ridiculous, but they definitely have a highly desired endpoint. Their highly desired endpoint being blocking out the sun, and then of course the CO2, carbon dioxide removal. They really want to remove carbon dioxide. They really want to block out the sun. That's their goal. So of course in my more recent videos I've pointed out that we seem to be in a dark forest encounter of some type, of some form. And one thing I realized recently is that to sort of justify that perspective, is that I would be able to use what's happened in science through the 20th century and up till now as a weapon of planetary annihilation on another planet. So think of that. So you might want to say, well, it's all just random and it's all just stupid people doing their usual stupid things. I mean, that's a possibility. I think framing it in terms of this dark forest encounter is a really good way to frame it because it is that dangerous. It results in the same outcome, you know? It should be treated at that level of danger because it is that level of danger. We're going to blocking out the sun and removing carbon dioxide. What's that going to do? It's going to stop photosynthesis. It's going to end all life on Earth, right? It's going to end all life on Earth. That's what it'll do, or at least cause extensive damage. It's terraforming also in a way either. So it's a good way to frame it in terms of a dark forest encounter. And that, why would that not be plausible? I think that is a plausible reality to live in, that we could be in a dark forest encounter. The point being that I could use the sequence of events that happened in science through the 20th century, first with Einstein hijacking relativity theory, and relativity theory is true, but Einstein hijacked it and just introduced a few irrational concepts, especially the simultaneity paradox, where things can be doing two different things at once, where one object, and that's what he did with relativity, one object can be doing two different things at once. So that the insertion of that concept then went to quantum mechanics, where quantum mechanics was then interpreted as, you know, this fuzzy, quasi-realistic, probabilistic reality where particles now must be understood as being two different places at once. And there's ways to get around that, which I wrote about in one of my recent books. And then once you have enough cognitive dissonance instilled and reinforced, now you introduce the cognitive dissonance, which now people are addicted to. Now academia is addicted to cognitive dissonance and loves cognitive dissonance and thinks that not being able to understand things is the goal of science, or is a necessary property of science, right? I mean, that's amazing, right? Like, think of the history of philosophy, and now here we are, because of this hijack of relativity and quantum mechanics, where now we think that it is a necessary property of philosophy and science to not understand reality, right? So once you have that cognitive dissonance set up strongly enough, now you introduce this climate science stuff based on flat earth theory, which they now are unable to comprehend is worse or better than spherical earth theory. Now they want to just stay with flat earth theory, right? And they can't comprehend what's wrong with it. And from here, we're going to devise a system to destroy ourselves. So I could deploy that. Like if I went to another planet that was like us in the 19th century, or 18th century, or whenever, the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, right? I could deploy this strategy to get them to destroy themselves. Like, I would know how to do it. So anyway, it kind of makes the point that, yeah, we are facing some sort of weapon. And again, yeah, either doing it to ourselves out of stupidity, but this is just such a degree of stupidity and intent. There's so much intent behind it, right? There's just so much intent behind it that it's impossible to be natural. And it's so well directed that it's purposeful. And so you have to ask who would have this purpose, because the end result of this, and a lot of people ask, well, they're going to hurt themselves. Yeah, they are going to hurt themselves. And why? Why would they not even care about hurting themselves? Because they don't care about human bodies. They don't care about Earth. They don't care if the body that they are inhabiting right now, you know, like Body Snatchers thing, you know, a foreign soul incarnating in our body, being hosted in our body. Yeah, they don't care if they kill their bodies. They don't belong to Earth. They don't want Earth. They hate Earth. They're extremely afraid of Earth. They hate it. They don't care if their bodies survive. They want their bodies to die. In fact, they're only hosting and being hosted in the bodies, in the human bodies here, for as long as they need to be, affecting their plan to basically end Earth or something. That would be the explanation. That would make it more consistent. The most likely and plausible explanation to justify it all, right? And again, you can't just say, oh, well, no, they're just trying to do what they think is best for the environment. It's like, okay, but why is it impossible for them to disagree with flat earth theory? Why is it impossible to have the discussion with them that maybe the spherical model is better and it explains the atmosphere and climate in a way in which CO2 is actually just a passive gas and good for the environment, it creates life, and there's no greenhouse. I mean, they really want to go to this. There's such an intent. There's such an intent that it just points to something other than an innocent wish to protect the environment, because there's all the evidence in the world that shows that the Earth's atmosphere would benefit the biosphere if the atmosphere had higher concentration of carbon dioxide. That would actually be better for life on Earth. So, but they hate that idea. They're so opposed to it and hate it so much. Okay, so anyway, this has gone on long enough. I think that's all I wanted to get out. So take care, everyone. Hope you're all doing well, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.